Today for our daily Moravian text reading, we are in Galatians chapter 2, verse 1 to 14. Now, in yesterday's reading, we were seeing Paul's credentials, his story, his background as a deeply, deeply devout religious Jew and living according to the law, and how Jesus reached out to him and rescued him. His life didn't merit it, didn't deserve it. He was persecuting the church, but God's grace extended to him anyway. He spent 3 years in Damascus learning about this gospel of grace. He then had 14 days in Jerusalem with Peter before going on to Syria for 14 years and back to Jerusalem, which is where we pick up the story today. You can track Galatians alongside the story in Acts, particularly Acts chapter 9. Now, today's reading once again is all about the nature of the true gospel, the gospel that hinges on grace, what God gifts to us undeserved or merited, as opposed to human effort, striving, and religious duty and obligation. And the example used here is, which was a big issue for the earliest church, when a Gentile, a non-Jew, becomes a follower of Jesus, should they be circumcised? Remember, circumcision was a sign that the people in the Old Testament were covenant people. They belonged to God as a sign of the covenant. And there was a group within the church in Galatia that were Jewish, the Judaizers as we refer to them as, that were trying to get those Gentiles who came into faith with Jesus circumcised. It was grace plus this. And of course, it doesn't work like that. It is grace and grace alone, isn't it? You can't have grace and this thing that's about human effort or achievement, the work of the human hand. It just doesn't work like that. It leads you into bondage and slavery. We lose our freedom. And freedom and slavery are big themes in Galatians. Freedom from the law to live in God's grace. I loved contrasting Peter and Paul in my studies this morning. Peter is the apostle to the Jews. Paul is the apostle to the non-Jews, the Gentiles. And it just it's so amusing when you think about it that Peter is this ordinary, unschooled, uneducated Galilean fisherman who's reaching out to the Jewish people who are highly trained in the scriptures. Paul is highly trained in the scriptures, but is reaching out to the non-Jews who don't know the scriptures. You'd almost put it the other way if it was based on human effort and qualification. But God is demonstrating here that he works and empowers us despite our lack of qualification, despite our training. He will still work through us, and often he loves to work through our area of weakness, because that's when he gets the most glory and honour and recognition. We can take no credit for it. In verse 11, we read how Paul challenged and opposed Peter when they were in Turkey, because Peter was trying to bring this legalism onto these Old Testament laws onto the non-Jewish Gentile believers. Verse 14, it says, when I saw that they were not acting in line with the truth of the gospel, God's grace, I said to Peter in front of them all, you're a Jew, and yet you live like a Gentile and not like a Jew. How then is it that you force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs? There's a hypocrisy here. Peter, growing up as a Jew, had been able to be liberated from those Jewish laws and regulations because of grace, but he was trying to impose those Jewish laws and regulations onto the Gentiles rather than grace and grace alone. And I suppose this fits back to what we were looking at in Acts, that the gospel is like a supraculture. It transcends all cultural ways of living and works through all of them. So for those Jewish followers of Jesus, they could continue to observe laws like kosher food laws and Sabbath laws, not to earn salvation, but to be a witness within that community, to still be culturally identified within that community. So you take something like, is circumcision required post the grace given by Jesus? Well, is it right or is it wrong? Well, it's wrong if you're doing it for your salvation. It's wrong if you're doing it to earn salvation, to earn sanctification. It's wrong if you're forcing that practice onto the Gentile non-Jewish believers, because that would alienate them from their own culture. Remember, supraculture, transcending culture. But actually, if it's just a purely cultural custom that allows you to engage in your culture, then go ahead. But it's not an issue of salvation. It's not an issue of covenant for non-Jews. And so I want us to, as we're reading through Galatians, just to remember that and to hold on to that grace that empowers us to live a holy life and not lose that freedom by either swinging one side, which is to legalism, self-effort, duty striving, or to the other side, which is just to say, well, you know, I don't have to do anything. I can just live like I want. That's taking grace for license. There is an effort to grace, and that effort is surrender. That effort is to press into Jesus, and that through that intimacy and through that encounter and through that grace that we receive, we are transformed more and more into his likeness. Amen.